I mean, it's just the easiest level change in the world for your opponent to just go boop, and you find them. They don't even need to shoot on you. You're essentially shooting on yourself at that point. Hey everybody, Laura Sanko here, and welcome to One on One. Now, normally I only do breakdowns for pay-per-view cards, but it is a special occasion. The UFC is going back to London. We had such a good time the first time. We had to do it again as soon as possible. So the UFC is headed back to London this weekend. And of course, I mean, I can't miss that card. I got to at least talk about the main event and the co-main event, at least touch on the co-main event, which is exactly what I'm going to do here. And since it is a special occasion, I thought I'd bring my forehead to the party. I normally wear hats because I can't stand the camera angle that my computer camera gives me, and it makes me feel self-conscious about my giant forehead. But you know what? We're rolling with it today because I can't have hat hair after this. I got somewhere to be. Enough about my forehead. This is a phenomenal main event. We've got number 4 ranked Curtis Blaydes taking on number 6 ranked Tom Aspinall. And man, if you're not familiar with Tom Aspinall, I don't know where you've been. I can tell you one thing. While I think the world of Curtis Blaydes, and I think that he does have the skill set to potentially get the better of Tom Aspinall, just in terms of like general excitement about a fighter and the skill set that they possess and the division in which they possess it. Katie bar the door. I'm buying Tom Aspinall tickets all day long. If there was a train, I have been driving it from the moment that I saw that guy fight. So I'm super excited to see this matchup, but this is a real test. Curtis Blaydes is a real test for Tom Aspinall. He's had some tests before. He has passed them all with flying colors, but this is a new one. So let's get into some of the stats that we're going to look at between these two fantastic heavyweight fighters. So first of all, we've got Curtis Blaydes, 16-3 with 1 no contest overall. Tom Aspinall, 12-2. Their records in the UFC got Curtis Blaydes 11-3 with 1 no contest, 6 knockouts, and 5 decisions. No submission wins for Curtis Blaydes, which is interesting because, as we probably know, if you're watching this channel, you probably know enough to know that Curtis Blaydes is, his main objective in a fight is to get to the ground. So it's pretty interesting that once he gets there, doesn't really care about submissions. He's looking to do damage, and we'll talk about that. And then we've got Tom Aspinall, who is 5-0 in the UFC. And I got to believe with a win in this matchup, knocking on the door of a title shot. I mean, such an exciting prospect. 3 knockouts and 2 submission wins and a ridiculously well-rounded skill set, which is much more common in the lighter divisions. And when I say well-rounded, he is truly a well-rounded fighter. He can strike, he can wrestle, he can do the blending of between those two, and he has a phenomenal jiu-jitsu game, not just on top, also off of his back, which may or may not come in handy in this fight. So let's look at some of these stats because they're pretty crazy. Like, these guys are specialists in their respective fields. You've got an average fight time. I'm just going to talk about the stats that jump off the page to me. Actually, you know what? Before I mention that, it does have to be brought up that both of these guys are what I would call like full-size heavyweights, and both of them, or I should say neither of them, is a heavyweight that's like carrying a lot of excess fluff. These are real athletes. They're both super tall, and they are both absolutely in the right weight class. Neither of these guys could make light heavyweight unless they chopped off a limb. So like, this is a true heavyweight athlete matchup, and I'm so excited for it. So right off the bat, when you start looking at some of their deeper statistics, Tom Aspinall's average fight time is 2 minutes and 57 seconds in the UFC. That is insane. And on the flip side of that, we've got Curtis Blaydes with an average fight time of 10 minutes and 14 seconds. I mean, it speaks to their styles, especially when you talk about Curtis, because, you know, he's looking to take this fight to the canvas, and he does such a good job of keeping it there when he does get it there. And then looking to do damage from those dominant positions. On the flip side, you've got Tom Aspinall, who has such a rare skill set of speed, power and technique that he's really making quick work of a lot of the really good guys in this division. The knockdown average is another thing. Tom Aspinall has 2 knockdowns average per 15 minutes, which is kind of funny math wise because he never makes it 15 minutes. Striking accuracy, both of them have very high accuracy stats. Curtis Blades is 51.3%. Tom Aspinall's is 65.9%. But when you look at the average strikes landed per minute, that is when you're like, oh my gosh, it really opens your eyes to what a phenomenal striker Tom Aspinall is, because he is landing 7.33 significant strikes per minute. That is unheard of at heavyweight. It is ridiculous at heavyweight to land that type of volume, and then you couple it with that type of accuracy, and it's like this. I mean, how do you get past a guy like that? Honestly, it reminds me a lot of Yuri Prochazka, not in their fighting styles at all, but in terms of those 2 statistics, it's the volume combined with the accuracy, and that makes for a very, very dangerous guy on the feet. Curtis Blades lands an average 3.52, which is roughly around the UFC average. Curtis Blades does have a very low strikes absorbed per minute stat, though, 1.68. That's very, very low. And that, again, speaks to his style. You know, he's a guy who will take his time on the outside and look for opportunities to create moments when he can get this fight where he wants it to be, which is, you know, in on someone's hips and right down to the canvas. So not surprising necessarily that he doesn't absorb that many strikes per minute. I think that stat might change after this fight, because man, Tom Aspinall is a pressure forward fighter, and if he wants to, he's going to find you. So Curtis has his work cut out for him. Here's where it gets very interesting, I think, the takedown accuracy, because frankly, although we know that, you know, Curtis Blades' game is based on the takedown, he wants the fight on the canvas. Tom Aspinall has a hell of a double leg, and absolutely amazing. He's got an open mat shot, and he's great. He's got great takedowns off the fence as well. He can wrestle to the body and he can wrestle to the legs, which are really 2 different skill sets. And then when you look at, you know, statistically how it breaks down, Curtis Blades has a 53.91% takedown accuracy, which, considering how much he shoots, is actually extremely high. Takedown accuracy, I think sometimes when someone has a low accuracy, it can, like, if you just look at that at face value, you know, it can seem like, oh, well, they don't, you know, they're not very good at getting a takedown. Well, a lot of guys and girls, their grappling game, their wrestling game is based on chaining takedowns together. So they might fail at the first, they might even fail at the second, but that third one is what they were after to begin with anyway. So Curtis Blades, again, he's got an open mat shot, he's got shots off the fence, and he's not afraid to chain things together. He's 62 of 115 takedowns in the UFC. On the flip side of that, Tom Aspinall has a 100% takedown stat, but a much smaller number. He's 4 for 4, but still, I mean, take that for what it is. It's not a very high number, but it is still 4 for 4. And one of those individuals, one of those opponents, I should say, being Alexander Volkov, who has notoriously very, very good takedown defense. Not so much against Curtis Blades, but in general, very good takedown defense. Tom Aspinall, 100% takedown defense. Again, 0 for 2. He's only been shot on twice, but still interesting to take note that he does so far have some pretty good takedown defense. I think we will definitely see that challenged in this matchup. And you have an average of just over 2 submissions every 15 minutes for Tom Aspinall. So when he does get down to the ground, it's not just ground and pound that he's looking for. He is also looking for the submissions. They really target the head, body, and leg roughly the same. So in terms of head hunting, body work, and leg kicks, they're roughly, you know, if they're throwing 10 strikes, they're each throwing roughly the same number to each type of target. Tom Aspinall, by no surprise, has a higher stat in terms of, like, he's landing more of his strikes at distance, whereas Curtis Blades, 41.7% of his strikes overall happen on the ground. I mean, this guy is so good at at finding the hips, at creating those situations to get his opponent on the mat. And then he's not looking to lose position. He's not a guy who's going to dive off for an arm bar and then accidentally get reversed. He's going to find his way into half guard, which is his preferred position. And he's going to start landing some devastating ground and pound. He's got those sneaky little elbows that will cut you open, thus the razor blades nickname, and hammer fists. And when he does have the posture and the openings, nasty ground and pound, absolutely nasty. All right, I think that covers it stat wise. So let's talk a little bit about their respective styles. And for Tom Aspinall, I kind of want to start at the beginning of his UFC run. His first UFC fight was against Jake Collier, which was an interesting matchup because, you know, we didn't really know what Tom was about unless you'd been watching him outside of the UFC. But as a UFC fan, you didn't really know what Tom was about. But you hear things from the people who do know, and they kept saying speed, speed. He's got this speed. Well, Jake Collier was an interesting matchup because, as we all know, Jake Collier was a former middleweight, making his way all the way up to the heavyweight division and doing really well there. Very, very fast hand speed for Jake Collier. So it was kind of like, all right, let's see if this guy is really as fast as everybody says he is. And it turns out it took him 45 seconds to prove just how fast he is. I mean, the second that they started moving, I mean, it was apparent, it was black and white that Tom Aspinall had a significant speed advantage. He put it right to work, landed a right hand, and Jake Collier was out. Next challenge, Alain Baudot. Another very interesting challenge because Alain Baudot, another very fleet-footed heavyweight. I mean, I think I've said this before in these videos. We say it, I think, too much about heavyweights, but it really does apply here. It applies to people like Cyril Gane. It applies to Alain Baudot, who happens to be his teammate. And it definitely applies to Tom Aspinall. So this was a fight where it's like, okay, you're going to fight another heavyweight who may not be the biggest heavyweight, but he is incredibly fast, has an excellent striking acumen. We're going to test what you bring on the feet. He was 8-1 at the time. Baudot was 8-1 at the time, I should say. And Tom and Aspinall, once again, very quick work. They were mixing up on the feet a little bit, but as soon as he wanted to change the tempo of the fight, Aspinall got the takedown right off the cage, right into mount, elbows, ground and pound, and that was all she wrote. Very, very quick fight again. Now, next fight, he fights Andrei Arlovski. This was, to me, the real, like, okay, you've impressed us, you've caught our attention, we see what you can do, but let's put you in there against, I mean, I don't think you can argue that there is more of a veteran in the heavyweight division. And you may say, okay, Arlovski's past his prime, and that may or may not be true, but I actually think Arlovski in some ways is like this fine wine that has aged into maybe not the fanciest version of himself, but man, is he hard to put away. And he's developed a skill set that has allowed him to evolve with the game, and it's pretty impressive. So an interesting matchup for Tom for sure. And it's the first time and only time that we've seen him go 2 rounds in the UFC. The first round, Tom was doing well on the feet, but Andre was offering definitely some challenges on the feet. I mean, he was returning with big power. But the thing that you notice when you watch Tom Aspinall in that first round against Andrei Arlovski, I think, because we didn't have enough time to really appreciate it in his previous fights, is his footwork. He has phenomenal footwork. He's always creating the perfect base for himself in order to generate that power. He has a very feint, heavy game, and he's got very long combinations. And the things I'm talking about there, you know, they're not surprising when you're talking about guys like Alexander Volkanovski, a featherweight. They're not surprising when you talk about guys like Charles Oliveira at lightweight. But when you start to get to the heavyweight division, a lot of guys, understandably so, are able to find the highest heights of success relying predominantly on their power and their size and their physicality. And they don't necessarily always develop the most sophisticated footwork and, you know, angle cutting and working of feints. All of the trap setting that you see in the lighter weight classes sometimes goes out the window at heavyweight, but not for Tom Aspinall. And that's what makes him such a threat for guys like Curtis Blades, who really haven't seen a look like that necessarily on the feet. There was a time in the first round where Tom Aspinall, hits and hurts Andrei Arlovski and unleashes a 30-shot combination. Andre did a phenomenal job of shelling up very tightly and not eating the brunt of most of those shots. But what I found interesting in that moment was the presence of mind of Tom Aspinall to immediately, once he realized, okay, I'm not going to get the finish here. I can't believe how I'm not going to get the finish here, but I'm not. He was able to clinch Arlovski against the cage and put that fight IQ to work and, you know, recuperate himself and recover a little bit in those moments and come out better in round 2. I say that because there's not tons of footage to go off, to be honest with you, with Tom Aspinall. Everything that you do see is really exciting and really impressive, but there are not long stanzas of him being challenged. So I guess I point out stuff like that only to say that in this fight, it's going to make sense for Curtis Blaydes to drag this fight out longer. We have not seen Tom Aspinall tested with the clock as of yet. But that one moment against Andrei Arlovski where he is able to check himself and say, hey, I'm at the threshold of punching myself out. I got to find a way to, you know, get that power bar back up. For him to have the presence of mind to do that against a veteran like Arlovski is very impressive. And then he did have the cardio, because really, you know, you have good cardio not necessarily in the immediate aftermath of unleashing a combination like that, although it is important. Really, it's, can you recover in between rounds? Is that minute long enough for you to get that power bar all the way back up to full and be ready to rock in the next round? And Tom Aspinall proved that it absolutely was. Not only that, he thought, okay, maybe I'm better than him on the feet. And he was definitely cutting better angles and finding the better shots. But an easier path to victory for me is going to be to shoot a takedown. And that is when we saw him shoot one of the most insane double legs I can think of, because he shot from like 10 feet out and just absolutely ran through Andrei Arlovski to the point where it was like he pinned him against the cage and then was able to then get that very, very fast rear naked choke without the hooks. I mean, the squeeze was ridiculous on that. And that to me was the moment where everybody kind of went, all right, this kid's for real, right? He just took out a legend of the game in Andrei Arlovski. He's got submissions, he's got power. All right, this kid's for real. Then they give him Sergey Spivak, which in some ways, not the challenge that Andrei Arlovski is, but a challenge in his own right. A very, very big physical guy, good ground game, but he much more of the like hulking sort of lumbering style. And again, you just see this insane speed advantage from Tom Aspinall. I can't say enough how fast this guy is for a heavyweight fighter. It is really amazing. But he showed a lot of composure, because I think, you know, you get the sense sometimes when he's fighting a guy like Sergey Spivak or a guy like Jake Collier, he knows going into that fight that he has a superior skill set. And it would be easy to go out there and just show everybody how great you are, right? Like rush into something. But that's when those guys end up finding wins that they shouldn't necessarily find. That's when you get caught, right? So it's impressive to see Tom Aspinall go out there, take his time a little bit, but as soon as they got into this clinch situation, you could just see the wheels of Tom Aspinall spinning a little bit faster than Sergey Spivak. He lands a knee. You can see Spivak kind of, you know, absorb it and block it a little bit, but the elbow, because Spivak was framing on him, if I remember correctly, and Tom just came right over the frame, landed this gorgeous elbow, which was, you know, the beginning of the end. So yet another knockout for Tom Aspinall. Then Alexander Volkov. And this was the real test. Alexander Volkov, a former champion in another organization, a ridiculous amount of fights, very, very, very difficult to finish, excellent takedown defense, and like 6'7", I think, ridiculous reach, very good kickboxing. And again, Tom Aspinall answered all of the questions that we had about him. How is he going to deal with the length of Alexander Volkov? Well, I'll tell you how he dealt with it. He didn't hesitate one bit. I mean, normally when you see that big of a height differential and reach differential, The shorter fighter, you can kind of see them like, okay, how am I gonna close the space? Like they kind of stay safe. They're feinting, they're making the reads, they're looking, but you can see them having to calculate and think about how they're going to close that distance. Tom Aspinall was careful and calculated, but there was no hesitation. There was no figuring out. It was like he walked into the octagon with the answers for how to close the distance on Alexander Volkov, and was not intimidated. He was still fighting off of the front foot, which was very impressive. And again, he used his speed advantage to the max in this fight. And again, the speed advantage was like obvious to anybody watching that fight. The timing on his takedowns were immaculate, and gets the takedown, gets into this sort of crucifix position, starts to look for a Kimura, but the sophistication of Tom Aspinall's submission game allowed him to find that straight arm lock, which is pretty rare, especially in the heavyweight division. And no one had submitted Alexander Volkov in 11 years. 11 years. I think the fact that Tom Aspinall has truly elite jiu-jitsu, and to give you a little background on that, well, let me finish my sentence. I think the fact that he has truly elite jiu-jitsu accompanied with elite speed and power and footwork, accompanied with very, very good wrestling. I mean, that is, you don't get much better than that. But on the jiu-jitsu side of things, I think when you look at his record, he's got all these knockouts. It's easy to think of Tom Aspinall as a striker, but his base in martial arts was jiu-jitsu. His father was the jiu-jitsu instructor at Team Cowbon. And as he came up the ranks, Tom started to teach those jiu-jitsu classes. So jiu-jitsu was his very first martial art piece of the MMA puzzle. So while if you're kind of late to figuring out who Tom Aspinall is, it'd be easy to think of him as like this knockout artist striker, which is true, but he also has a very good jiu-jitsu game. And because it's a pure jiu-jitsu game, it's not just that he's good on top. He can also work off of his back, which he might have to do in this fight. So on the flip side of things, we have Curtis Blaydes, who has been in the UFC for a very long time. And his only losses in the UFC are to Francis Ngannou twice and Derek Lewis. Those are not bad losses to have. The fact is that 11 of the other best heavyweights in the UFC have not been able to figure out how to stop Curtis Blaydes' game. And I think every time you have a guy who has a specific game, Alexei Oleinik always comes to mind when I say that, like, everyone knows what he's going to do. Everyone knows what he's going to do. Everyone knows that Curtis Blaydes is going to shoot. And yet that is still his path to success. And it's impressive to see him put that game plan to use virtually every time he goes out there. And I say virtually because I believe we're coming off of Curtis Blaydes' potentially his best performance yet. And it was a performance in which, if I remember correctly, he didn't shoot a single takedown against Chris Daukaus. Now, Chris Daukaus on a heck of a win streak when they fought. And while he may not be some elite level striker, he is a very good boxer and very, very heavy hands. He had been knocking guys out left and right up into that point. And Curtis Blaydes on the flip side, not necessarily known for his striking. You say Curtis Blaydes, immediately you think wrestling, and you should. But in that fight, we saw a version of Curtis Blaydes striking that I think was a true coming out party for the evolution that he has been working on for a long time. As I said, he didn't shoot a single takedown. What he did do was work behind his jab, put together nice combinations, but the footwork was finally really, really on point for Curtis Blaydes. His ability to switch stances back and forth fluidly, as he was in the pocket and as he was making those incremental distance manipulations, was a huge evolution for him, because it's kind of fun to watch his fights sequentially, which is what I did to prepare for this. And when you watch him back to back to back like that, it's night and day. Like if you go months without seeing him fight and then you see him fight, like, oh yeah, his striking looks better, but it's hard to see the specifics of why it looks better. I'm telling you guys, it is his footwork. His feet have really, really come along. And the way that he was able to finish Chris Daukaus was because he was round 2. He comes and he approaches Daukaus in an orthodox stance. He's able to really subtly, which is the key, subtly switch to southpaw. And then I don't remember exactly what shot it was, but also subtly switch right back into orthodox as Chris Daukaus is looking to land something. And he just opens up this right hand opportunity, and Curtis Blaydes shuts his lights out. So the fact that Curtis Blaydes is no longer this guy that can only wrestle, of course, that's going to be his game plan. Of course, that's going to be what he's going to look to do in this fight, but he doesn't have to do it. He doesn't have to do it right away. And that is the key. The fact that he has the confidence to be able to stand there at distance and in the pocket and work behind his jab and find the angles, find the openings. That's really when your wrestling becomes extra dangerous, because you're not forcing the takedowns. Against Jairzinho Rosenstruik, who is fast-handed, but not in the same way that Tom Aspinall is, because Jairzinho Rosenstruik, while he's very fast, is not the highest volume individual. So it was an interesting practice for Curtis Blaydes to deal with someone who punches very quickly, but has long stanzas of just sort of giving looks and giving feints and waiting, to be honest with you. He got some great takedowns in that fight. And the interesting thing was that as the fight went on, you could see Jairzinho become more and more and more tentative with his own striking game because of Curtis's success in finding the takedowns. I don't think that that is something he's going to be able to do to Tom Aspinall. I don't think that Tom Aspinall is going to be overly afraid of the takedowns of Curtis Blaydes. We will see, because if he ends up on his back and Curtis is able to wear that wrestler heavy pressure and do damage on top, that's a different story. But on paper, I think Tom Aspinall will be able to deal with being on his back better than most heavyweights would, because of his jiu-jitsu background and because he's able to be an offensive threat even when he's put on his back. Now, the fight that I think is an interesting look for Curtis Blaydes, or I should say, the fight that tells us a lot about what Curtis Blaydes cannot do against Tom Aspinall, is his fight with Derek Lewis. If you go back to Derek Lewis, this is the Curtis Blaydes that was way, way, way too myopic about finding the takedown. It was literally like you could just see him going, oh, okay, I can't shoot there. All right, can't shoot. Like, he wasn't throwing any type of offense out. He was just waiting and looking and waiting and looking. Now, it's understandable, because Derek Lewis was very much doing the opposite of that, which was also waiting, but waiting for Curtis Blaydes to shoot so that he could throw a knee or an uppercut or whatever he needed to do to, touch up Curtis Blaydes as he was shooting in. There just was not enough trap setting and not enough traffic making on the part of Curtis Blaydes for Derek to think about. And what happened was, because there wasn't an opportunity, because Curtis didn't get Derek doing this, raising his guard up and to present his hips, Derek did what Derek was looking to do the entire fight, which was land an uppercut right as Curtis Blaydes shot in. And that uppercut was so crazy because Curtis was like deep on the hips when it landed. And you can see Lewis's arm is still back here. It's not like the uppercut made it all the way up and he reached, or he hit the uppercut at its most devastating point. It's all the way back here, and still you see Curtis Blaydes just absolutely crumpled to the canvas. He cannot shoot in on Tom Aspinall without creating traffic, without creating opportunities, because I can assure you that Tom Aspinall will be doing a lot of the same things in terms of showing what I like to call the price of admission. You have to show knees, you got to show uppercuts, you got to show front kicks, all of those weapons right up the middle that tell you. And even if you're just feinting, heavy feints, heavy hip feints, you can even sort of, do these like question mark, it's kind of hard to see in this camera angle, but question mark punches where it looks like an uppercut and then it turns into something else. Start disguising things as other things so that your opponent has a much harder time getting the read on what's coming at them. But to give that message to Curtis Blades, listen, you may come looking for my hips, but you're going to have to pay a price if you enter past a certain point. That's going to be pivotal for Tom Aspinall in this fight. And then, of course, I mean, you got to touch on the common opponent they have, which is Alexander Volkov. Honestly, not a lot to talk about in terms of Curtis Blades, other than the fact that he took down Alexander Volkov 14 times in that fight. 14 times. As I mentioned off the top, Alexander Volkov actually has really good takedown defense, just not against Curtis Blades, because that was an absolute whitewash in terms of wrestling. I don't think he's going to be able to be that successful against Tom Aspinall, so he cannot rely on that specific of a game plan. He's got to be a real mixed martial artist in this fight. But I do think, especially coming off that last performance, I definitely think he's capable of doing that. A couple of things that I think, looking at the tape of these two, could get really interesting. And they're little things. I don't know that they'll play a role, but it's just little things that made my brain light up as I was watching film on these two. I think for Curtis Blades, heavy hip feints from him could be a really interesting way to set up takedowns, because Tom Aspinall has, I don't want to say habit. I guess it is a habit. I wasn't going to say habit, but I guess it is a habit. He has a habit of bouncing his lead leg almost in sort of a Muay Thai style. He's very good at checking kicks as a result, but anytime you've got your lead leg lifted, you are definitely susceptible for the takedown. Now, obviously, as I said just a second ago, Curtis Blades can't go rushing in and eating a knee, but when Tom's doing that sort of like, it's not a knee, he's just lifting his leg so that he can check any potential calf kicks or leg kicks. If Curtis can get him thinking about leg kicks, thinking about calf kicks, and then disguise one and immediately shoot in, it's going to be really difficult for Tom Aspinall to defend when he's standing on one leg. So that's an interesting thing I think we can look for in that one. And then I think for Curtis Blades, the biggest thing here is just going to be blend, 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 blend. He has got to be able to take the wrestling and the striking, and it's this area right here, the middle, the stuff in the middle, the blending of the two is where Curtis Blades is potentially going to win this fight, and where he needs to be very, very cognizant of Tom Aspinall breaking off with elbows and finding those opportunities. But if Curtis Blades can set up his takedowns, can create the traffic that gets Tom Aspinall thinking even momentarily, then potentially he can find the hips and challenge Tom Aspinall's clock, because that's the one thing that we don't necessarily know about Tom Aspinall. I think he's a well-trained individual. I think he's a very hardworking individual, but certainly by the look at him, he's in great shape. So I don't necessarily have a indication that Tom Aspinall has any issues with his gas tank, but the fact is we just have not seen that challenge. So, and we know that Curtis Blades can go the full distance of a fight. So I think that that is a pretty standard thing for him to look to do in this one. And for Tom Aspinall, it's sort of the flip side of that. You know, he has this very pressure forward game, but he's going to have to be very cognizant of how he pressures forward, because what the wrestler wants you to do is, it happened to me yesterday in practice twice in a row, and I was so irritated with myself. You know, you land on someone and, or you're looking to get one back. And so you put a little extra on that right hand and you overextend for even just the briefest of moments. That, I mean, it's just the easiest level change in the world for your opponent to just go boop, and you find them. They don't even need to shoot on you. You're essentially shooting on yourself at that point. So I'm not saying Tom Aspinall would make those types of mistakes, but he's got to be very careful with how he approaches pressuring Curtis Blades. But I do think pressure is the key. I don't necessarily think it would be wise for Tom Aspinall to sit back too much, because the other thing about pressuring a wrestler is it is really difficult to wrestle if you're on the back foot. There's a difference between what I just described, which is where, say, the wrestler is sort of marching forward, inching forward a bit, and then, you know, the other fighter, call him fighter B, lands that right hand. Fighter B, if fighter B wants to go land it again and get his, that's what I'm talking about when you're overextending. Pressuring forward is is a different look. And Tom Aspinall is very, very good at doing this. And if he can do it in a calculated manner, it really can pay dividends for him in this fight, because if you are consistently backing up, consistently on the back foot, it is more difficult to set up your shots if the other person is not overextending on theirs. Wrestling backwards is super, super tough. So I think that we're going to see that forward pressure from Tom Aspinall. And frankly, I would not be at all surprised if we see Tom Aspinall shoot on Curtis Blades, like not even a little bit surprised. I think that he could, I don't know, Tom Aspinall doesn't strike me as a guy with like an ego that wants to go out there and prove a point. But if the opportunity presents itself, I think he's got what it takes to take Curtis down. And he certainly has the submission game to be able to do some good work when he does get it to the ground. It is going to be a fantastic main event, like a fantastic main event. And I'm so jealous. I'm not going to London this time because I've got Contender Series, but the O2 Arena is going to be absolutely insane. And before I finish this video, I have to at least touch on the co-main event, because this is such a cool fight. It was supposed to be, well, it was supposed to be even cooler, but it was supposed to be Jack Romansen versus Darren Till, which Darren, as we all know, has been off for quite a while. He's dealt with a myriad of injuries. And yet again, had to pull out of this card. It's absolutely heartbreaking to see him talk about and kind of, I don't know, just what he's gone through, trying to get past this rough point in his career and trying to deal with it, with this injury now. But the small silver lining is that we have two sort of like really cool, heartwarming stories coming up. The first story, and I don't mean to not talk about Jack Romansen, because Jack Romansen's awesome. He's got an amazing submission game, and I don't want to cut him short, but I have to talk about how awesome Chris Curtis is, because I see Chris Curtis often when I'm in Las Vegas, because I cross train at Extreme Couture when I'm out there. And I'm trying to remember if it was season 1 or season 2, but he was on the Contender Series, one of the very first seasons. He actually got a knockout. He knocked his opponent out and still did not get a UFC contract. It was like this weird, and I don't even remember why Dana said, but sometimes I don't know, sometimes it doesn't seem like there's a great reason, but he got an incredible finish, did not get the UFC contract, continues to sort of fight on the regional scene, does pretty well, goes to the PFL and loses 3 in a row in the PFL. Like, if you're doing good in the regional scene, you make it to the PFL, but then you lose, like that's a tough spot to be in. Goes back to the regional scene, does some work at Icon. Like, he spent 11 years outside the UFC. And this is not a sport where it pays you back. Honestly, this is not a sport where you're making a lot of money outside of the UFC. It's hard on your body. It's hard on your emotions. It's hard on your social life. Like, this is a tough sport. And to be able to stick with it that long and just keep going. I freaking love stories like this. I remember seeing him at the gym, and like, he was going to one of his PFL fights and everybody was super excited for him. And the next time I saw him, he's like, oh man, it didn't go my way, but I'm going to get there. I'm not going to give up. And when he got this last minute call to step in and fight Phil Hawes on a UFC card, he was like a plus 350 underdog, ridiculous underdog, goes out there, knocks him out. Then they match him up with Brendan Allen, an excellent middleweight, knocks Brendan Allen out. Then they match him up with Adolfo Vieira, whose nickname is the Black Belt Hunter. Like, you don't get better on the ground than Adolfo Vieira. And Adolfo Vieira does not get submitted. All of a sudden, Chris Curtis is like this golden child. And I freaking love it, because I'm telling you guys, he is just a wonderful, awesome human being. And Jack Romansen is also, but like, Chris Curtis's success is part of why I love this sport so much. The second story that I'm getting to that's so heartwarming is that he's going to have Darren Till in his corner, which is so cool. I mean, it sucks that Darren's not going to be able to make the walk as a fighter, but like, Sean Strickland couldn't travel with Chris Curtis. That's normally his corner. And he asked him on Twitter, and Darren's like, hell yeah, I'll do it. Now the question is he going to walk out to Sweet Caroline? Because I actually think that'd be pretty cool, because it would be almost like Darren was walking out, and we all wish Darren was walking out. But anyway, just a couple of cool side stories for you. That's going to be a really fun fight. I can't wait for this entire card. We've got Patty the Baddie versus Jordan Levitt. We've got Molly McCann versus Hannah Goldie, like stacked top to bottom. Do not miss this card. Thank you guys so much. Please, if you enjoy these videos, I would love to hear your comments on what you like, even what you don't like. Just don't be mean. And if you do like, click subscribe because it definitely helps out. And I will see you guys in anticipation of the next pay-per-view, which actually is right around the corner. So I'll see you soon.